Good morning. I appreciate the warm welcome, and I would like to thank Aaron for lending me his pulpit for a week. I think Aaron and I have sort of came to our ministries at the same time, I think, and we've become friends. He's been to a number of events that my organization has done, and I've always valued his friendship and his work in this field. So I want to tell you a little bit about how I came to be standing here today. So I moved to Kansas in 2007. I lived in Wichita for 3 years, and then we moved to Kansas City in 2010. My wife is from KC Mo. And in March, I had been on the board steering committee of an organization called Kansas Interfaith Power and Light, which was a faith-based approach to climate change. So we were organizing in the faith community about climate change as a moral issue. And in March of 2011, the executive director job came open. Since I had been on the board, I had been off the board for about a year, but I was hired. So I've been doing what I'm doing now, more or less, since March of 2011. And we worked on a number of important issues during those years. If you keep track of Kansas politics, the renewable portfolio standard, which was a mandate for wind energy that the utilities had to obey, had to meet. We worked on that for a couple of years. And then in 2015, a number of things happened, one of which was we had to reincorporate because we had a fiscal sponsorship relationship with an organization and they had financial problems, so we had to spin off. And then also, it had become very clear that the faith voice in public policy from, say, the center to the left was underrepresented in Kansas, and that's putting it mildly. So right-wing politics has plenty of people right-wing Christianity has plenty of people who put it into political effect, but moderate to liberal, mainline Jewish, Muslim faith was not being articulated at all, really, aside from the climate change issue. So we, in 2015, end of 2015, we reincorporated as Kansas Interfaith Action. So we see ourselves as a multi-faith, multi-issue public policy advocacy organization. So I go around I'm a registered lobbyist. In the first few months of the year, I'm in Topeka, so a lot of the legislators know me. I testify on different things, or we'll do campaigns or advocacy campaigns about various issues. And then the rest of the year, I travel and I speak in churches and I do house parties and house meetings and stuff, trying to grow the base, trying to show people that there's representation for faith values in Kansas, and we're putting that together, and that's really what I'm doing here. Since 2016, the organization's been called Kansas Interfaith Action, and when we were thinking about what issues we wanted to address, we turned to reconnect with someone who I think is one of the greatest Americans that's ever been produced, and that's Dr. King. So I put it to you that Dr. King is not a figure from the dim and distant past who we see once a year giving a speech in a black and white clip by the Lincoln Memorial, but is someone who had a very cogent diagnosis of the issues that face this country then and now, and also had a prescription which we too can apply to the ills that face our society. So let's look at that a little bit. So he had what he called, in the Riverside Church speech that Aaron mentioned, he had what he called the three evils, or the triple threat. So he called them racism, poverty, and militarism. So that became the basis of what we were doing at Kansas Interfaith Action. And we start with racism discrimination, which I believe is the original sin of the American experiment. Recent events have shown us, even ripped from the headlines, for those of us who are able to ignore this problem most of the time, that this issue does not go away, has not gone away. From the circumscribed opportunities for people of color, to militarized policing in majority black neighborhoods, to the huge percentage of African Americans, particularly men, in the criminal justice system, and has been violently apparent in recent years, the incidents of violence between black people and the police. To this, I think we can add armed white militants taking over a national park and not having anything happen to them, whereas Native American protesters who are protecting their sacred lands and waters from pipelines are maced and beaten and suppressed. And I think this is especially cogent for us in Kansas City because Kansas City is the sort of prototypical segregated city and actually is the originator of the practices of redlining and blockbusting, the effects of which we still live with to this day. So what white progressives need to understand is that there can be no economic justice and no social justice without racial justice. Now here's a good place for an amen. Let me say it again. Let me try it again. I know you're Congregationalists, but let's get a little spirit here. What white progressives need to understand is that there can be no social justice and no economic justice without racial justice. All right. And since the sin is ours, the responsibility for repentance and reparation is ours as well. So the recent election opened up whole new avenues of white resentment that we thought or hoped had gone away. To this category, we can add the sins, the multitude of prejudices that beset our society of Islamophobia, of anti-immigrant nativism, of homophobia and transphobia. White nationalists, so-called, doing a torchlight parade near a synagogue in Charlottesville has particular emotional resonances for me as a Jewish person. Kansas Interfaith Action bases our work in this area on two key cornerstones: that everyone is created in the image of God and that everyone deserves equal protection under the law. And that's where we start. And everybody across the spectrum can agree to those two statements. Our second area is economic justice. I always tended to sort of say poor people over here, but when we recently had an event where we went around the room to talk about people's economic situation, and there's a lot of people in a state of precariousness at this time. I think all of us probably know people, or some of us might be people who are in a state of precariousness, very close to the financial edge. If it's not you, it's your parents or your siblings or your children, or the person who teaches your children, or the home healthcare worker who cares for your parents. There's never 6 degrees of separation from precarity. And I think of the working people in Houston who struggle to make ends meet, and then a flood comes and wipes out everything they have, and if they don't have flood insurance, then they're basically, at the mercy of FEMA and basically have everything wiped out. And that happens quite more often than we'd like to think. Meanwhile, wealth inequality is at the worst since the Gilded Age, as all the benefits of economic growth go up to the top. Minimum wage is stagnant, and we know that it's impossible to afford a 2-bedroom apartment on minimum wage anywhere in the country. Many people who work for minimum wage are on food stamps or other forms of public assistance, which means that our society is subsidizing corporations who are underpaying their workers. And the social safety net is in tatters, including state support for higher education, which has always been the stepping stone to the middle class for working people and their children. And of course, to this we can add affordable health care. This year we came within 3 votes of expanding Medicaid in Kansas, which would have allowed 150,000 working Kansans to access affordable health care, working Kansans. And on the federal level, I see they're having another go at the Affordable Care Act, which is only half a loaf by itself, but which gave 21 million people access to health insurance who wouldn't have otherwise had it. And we're socialized to think that the poor have no one to blame but themselves, which I don't think is how Jesus would have seen it. And then the third evil is violence or materialism. In the Riverside Church sermon, Dr. King said that a society, quote, a nation that continues year after year to spend more on defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death, end quote. Is that any different today? We as a society have more or less agreed that the Iraq War was a mistake, but when a new threat is perceived, our first response is always to address it with military means. We never really process our mistakes. We just kind of sweep them under the rug and move on to make the next one. Dr. King said the biggest purveyor of violence in the world was his own government. And this is an issue we tend to ignore, but we have a military budget the size of the next 7 countries' budgets combined, plus 800 military bases in 70 countries. So we have a lot of hammers with which to look for nails. $5 trillion in war spending over the last 16 years. Couldn't all that money be put to much better use fixing our roads and bridges, educating and feeding our children, and building our clean energy future? And so without, so within. We live in a society racked with fear of each other and armed to the teeth. Anyone without a criminal record, and some with, can carry any weapon they want, anywhere they want, without training or permit or consideration for those who don't want to live in such a world. And as the statistics show, the good guy with a gun myth is just that, it's a myth, and that weapons are far more likely to be used for domestic violence or suicide than for self or home protection. Kansas has the laxest gun laws in the country, and to this we have just added the ability to carry concealed firearms without permit, without training, onto our public colleges and university campuses. And if you'll forgive me, to Dr. King's 3 evils, I'll add a 4th, climate disruption. This came to awareness after his death, but I'm sure he'll forgive me for adding it. Lest we forget, in the face of other issues that come up on a daily basis, with the way that we're powering our society is causing changes in the very chemistry of the atmosphere that has repercussions that we're only beginning to see with every wildfire or with every 500-year hurricane that comes every week, it seems like right now. And these are not separate issues. All of them are interrelated. We buy a bunch of stuff we don't need because cheap energy makes it affordable, which contributes to climate change, which leads to natural disasters, which wipes out people, and leads to refugees, which we then deal with either with racist bans or with military action overseas. We treat the earth as if it's here for our use and pleasure, and treat other people and other species that way as well. We have to start looking at people as you instead of as they. Look at the other as someone who is integrally connected with us. And I think that an important theological development that Christianity has begun and that needs to really be pursued is the move away from a theology of hierarchy to a theology of holism, where we are part of the whole. We need to think of these 4 evils not so much as political issues, but as moral issues. So Kansas Interfaith Action says we don't need a left or a right, we need a moral center. Systemic racism is a moral issue. Poverty and economic injustice are moral issues. Militarism and the war economy are moral issues. Climate change is a moral issue. Recognizing them is morality, and addressing them is justice. So that's why it's so important that this work come from a faith perspective. Our traditions have language that help us to see these issues through the time-honored lens of our sacred values. A couple of examples. When the immigrant resides with you in your land, you shall not oppress the immigrant. The immigrant who resides with you shall be to you as the citizen among you. You shall love the immigrant as yourself, for you were immigrants in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So don't go to kids' schools to pick up the parents when they go to pick up the kids. Don't break up families and communities. Don't use the information they gave you, as in DACA, to punish them. And another quote, if anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need, but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth. People of faith are uniquely qualified to address the moral bases of our public policy decisions, and that's what Kansas Interfaith Action was founded to do. We build our movement via broad principles, healthcare as a human right and not a privilege, where public money should be spent on public welfare instead of endless warfare, where we move rapidly to a carbon-free economy, where militarized policing and mass incarceration are ended. We build it across religion, across the boundaries of religion, across the boundaries of race, and across economic status. By coming together, we build a beloved community that cannot be built within the walls of our own individual synagogues and churches. And together we demand the impossible. And until we are ready to pursue it, to demand it, to pursue it, and to disrupt, to disobey, to risk our lifestyles and even our lives to take the leaps necessary for the sake of justice, then we're never going to get it. And I say this to you because you are the people who can change it. Injustice is there for all to see, but it's only when the people who have gained the benefits of our society, when you or I stand up for justice, that progress will be possible. In Deuteronomy 16, it's written, "Justice, justice you shall pursue." It's a principle of Jewish biblical interpretation that no word in Scripture is wasted, so why is the word justice repeated twice? A couple of possibilities: justice not only in the easy things, but in the hard things. Justice not just for ourselves, but for those we don't know and those we might be inclined to sit in judgment of. They deserve justice too. Justice not just in the letter of the law, justice not for the poor person, but for the rich person as well. Not just in the letter, but in the spirit. Justice, justice you shall pursue. And love, which is an important balance to justice. I think about this a lot, and I know that Dr. King's insistence on love sounds to our cynical ears like a lot of 60s nostalgia. I know there are people who want to do us harm, and there are even more who don't care one way or the other. And I know that it's very easy for me as a middle-aged, middle-class white guy to tell people they should base their resistance in love. And every time I mention love, someone comes up to me after the sermon and says, how am I supposed to love Donald Trump? And I actually don't have an answer to that. But maybe that's not the way to think about it. In the Buddhist practice of loving kindness meditation, we start with ourselves, move to someone we love, then move to people we interact with casually, and then start moving to people we have tensions with. So let's start there. We start with loving each other and loving within the church, which is great, and then let's love the immigrant. Let's love the person in economic distress. Let's love the black person we see on the street, or the woman in the hijab, or the trans person. When we feel that feeling of judgmentalism and repulsion, let's work to replace it with love. That's a spiritual practice. Maybe then we can be spiritually advanced enough to worry about loving those who would do us harm. And let's put that love into action in our homes, in our workplaces, in our congregations, in the election booth, and in the streets. For love is not a passive acceptance, which I think is also a misinterpretation of Dr. King, but an active force that can serve as the engine for all we are trying to do, the world we are trying to build. Let's build a mass movement based on love and justice to collect and activate what Gandhi called satyagraha, soul force, to build the future we want and need starting right here, right now. Cornel West said that justice is what love looks like in public, and I love that line. And finally, a word about hope. At a time like this, hope seems the most difficult thing of all. But what choice do we have? Hope is not blind optimism, but the belief that if we act with a commitment to justice from a place of love, we can make a difference for the better. And we've seen that that's true. Vincent Harding said, "The older I get, the more I am convinced that if you allow yourself to really hunger and thirst after the right way, that if you will not back off from the hunger and thirst, just keep after it, then you will find the way. You will be filled. The way will find you. I think that the determination to find a truly democratic society and to create the truly beloved community, those are things that can be available to us if we're willing to work with each other and work with the universe on developing them. They don't come free and easy. They are tough, tough tasks for us to take on." And from David Henderson, optimism claims everything will be all right despite reality. Hope accepts reality, the poverty of spirit that underlies all fear, instigates all tragedies. But hope has a trump card, the capacity of the human heart. When optimism gets ground up by reality, hope will go toe-to-toe with reality because of a heart that simply refuses to quit. A heart that simply refuses to quit. Or as a rabbinic text says, "Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor," you are not expected to complete the work, but neither are you free to desist from it. Kansas Interfaith Action is part of what Reverend William Barber is calling a moral revolution. Our goal is to bring us together as a moral voice in public policy in Kansas by bringing dedicated people of faith and conscience, of all traditions and none, together to stand up to the four evils of violence, poverty, racism, and climate disruption. We are faith-based because religion and spirituality, though they have all too often been used for evil, have the capacity to lift us beyond ourselves, beyond our own circles, and to base our political discussions on a fundamental commitment to our core religious values of justice, compassion, and love. It is in this way that we will express our deepest values and have our greatest impact in the life of our state and our nation. And perhaps, just perhaps, if we truly come together in this godly effort, we will build a world where every one of us, rich and poor, black and white, gay or straight, Muslim, Christian, Buddhist, atheist, or Jew, we can, as Dr. King concluded his talk at Riverside Church 50 years ago, if we will but make the right choice, we will be able to speed up the day all over America and all over the world when justice will roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. Please join us in this sacred work. Thank you.